In 1980, I moved to Northern California from Southern California, and that's where all of this life experience took place in a small town called Paradise, California.
Yeah. You lived, how long did you live in Paradise?
Almost 40 years.
40 years in Paradise. And the
Yes.
irony is that it's called Paradise. And talk about, riding through something with the flag. You survived the Great Fire there. What year was that? What year did that happen, Sandra?
November 8th, 2018.
2018. Geez, only 3 years ago, eh?
Yeah. Not quite 3 years. Yeah.
Wow. So, can you talk about that? Would you mind talking about that a little bit, your experience with the fire?
Oh, I would be glad to because at the end of all of it, it's about trauma, and it was about a town that had no warning, and every person in that community, which I think is around 35,000, was blindsided. So on that morning, I was at work, which I didn't tell you that I still had my catering business, but I also worked for the hospital there in Paradise, and I did all of their catering. So that particular day, we all went out on the not a lot of us, everyone, a few of us went out on the dock, the loading dock, and we saw this really dark, ominous cloud, and it was really frightening. It was intimidating, this cloud. But then somebody mentioned, well, it's in the canyon, it's a fire in the canyon, it happens all the time, we'll be fine. So we all just kind of shrugged it off, walked back in the kitchen, and not more than 3 minutes later, I'm at the stove cooking for an event the next day, and my supervisor, and there was something in her body language that made me ask her, where are you going? And she said, not good. I turned off the stove. I followed her. And within 3 minutes, 5 of our buildings at the hospital were burning down. That fire had jumped to the hospital. I ran back in the kitchen, told everybody to get out, grabbed my keys, my coat, ran through fire, threw my coat on the ground, got in my SUV, and took off towards home. The problem is it was 35,000 people at once trying to get out, and it was gridlocked. And I had to make the decision, am I going to go back home to try and save some things? In the meantime, my daughter calls me, my middle daughter, screaming at me not to go back home. And then the grid broke, and we had no electricity, no cell phone usage. It was 8:05 in the morning, and it was complete dark with ash, our windows already covered in ash. So I did go back, but I made this decision what normally would take me 8 minutes took me 33 minutes, and I had that time to think, am I going to do this? Am I really going to do this? Well, you better have a plan, and you better work your plan, and I did. I drove it down my road, backed in, went to the garage, got long plastic containers, 2 of them, dragged them in my 64-year-old up the stairs house and into my
You went
office.
upstairs?
Well, there's steps up to my
Oh, I
up to
see.
my house. It's an old
I was
house,
like, my
So I went. I
goodness.
mean, it's in the dark, and I'm dragging these behind me, and I could only fit one at a time in this tiny little room, which is my office. And in the dark, like in Braille, I opened this bottom drawer. I threw flat files in. I moved a huge dresser. I got container after container after container of pictures, and I didn't even know what I was grabbing because I couldn't see anything. And I dragged that container out and down the steps and somehow lifted it up in the back of my car. Um, I'm in fight or flight mode, and that entire time that I'm going back and forth, the propane tanks are blowing up in my neighborhood, and the pieces are falling on me. So, long story short, I knew I needed to leave. I said goodbye to my home. I I thank God for all the memories that I had there, and then I thanked my house for loving me, and I left. And then that's what took me another 8 to 9 hours to get out of that town, where I drove down streets of fire and a telephone pole falling and clipping the side of my car. And what would normally take me 4 minutes took me 40 minutes down this one road where every building on both sides, and the trees and the telephone poles are on fire. They're falling in front of me, one after another, and I would just have to stop and wait and look up and hope that another one wouldn't fall. Finally made it down that road, and then was told I couldn't go any further because there's only 3 ways out, and they're all on fire. They're all burning down. So I wound up sitting for 8 more hours, and there were 3 lanes. I was in the middle, and before that time, I had fight or flight mode. But we're all sitting there for 8 hours, and the smoke and the smoke and the fumes are choking us. You can hear people coughing in their cars, and I really, really had to stop and think at that moment, in those moments, about my life. And I wanted to leave my kids a note, but I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to burn up. And your whole life passes through you when you're in a situation like that. And you just kind of make this deal with God that you're going to follow through and get to your dreams and all your personal commitments you've made to yourself. And all these things go through your mind. And right about that moment, the fire is coming down off the hillsides like lava, because it was a fire-induced tornado fire. And the car on the left and the vehicle on the right both burst into flames at the same time, and I'm caught in the middle. And that was the moment that my brain froze. And long story short, all of a sudden that middle lane opened up, and I was able to move, which everybody now is moving in, and I was able to get out, and then had to drive again through fire. Got down the hill 10 hours later and pulled in a parking lot, and looked back up at what I just escaped, and looked around at all the people doing the same thing. And it reminded me of 9/11 Ground Zero, that we were all standing there covered in grace, that we were the people that survived. 88 people died, but we made it out. And it really, from that moment on, led me down a path to discover why things happen. Why does trauma like this happen to people? And I spent the next 2 years healing and working on my trauma and figuring all of that out. And at the end of the day, we all had one thing, and that was perspective. And we got to choose what that perspective would be. And mine was gratitude. Gratitude for my whole life, even though I lost everything I owned. I lost my community, my home, and my work, but my life was saved. And I actually gleaned more and found diamonds along the way through that experience.
Your courage in that situation, I can't even imagine it being in between 2 exploding vehicles. You would just freeze.
You freeze, your brain stops.
You freeze, you're afraid to move, you know. Wow, what an experience and an ordeal. Now, what did you learn from that experience? What did you take from it?
I learned a couple things. One was, when there's a death or a catastrophic event or a divorce or whatever situation we're going through, whatever situation we're going through at the time, what we need before that event happens is what we're going to receive on the other end of it. But we have to go through it in order to get. It could be a blessing. It could be many, many things. It could be a healing. There's many things that we have to go through. And I had to, like Phoenix, I had to rise through the fire, to go through that fire to get. And one of the things, I got many things, but one of the things that I learned for myself personally was to take my dreams off the shelf and start living them, because I didn't know how to do that.